There's an argument to be made that the MCU hasn't produced any outright terrible movies. Sure, there have been a few disappointments, you know, your Dark World, your Iron Man 2s, and a couple that were plain old boring like Ant-Man and, Ant-Man 2, but they were all still worth seeing. However, one of the major drawbacks associated with pretty much every movie in the MCU in Phase 1 and 2 is the lack of long-term consequences. Infinity War and Endgame tackled this criticism head-on to glorious success, but there have still been times where Marvel could have gone all in on a plot development and decided to pull their punches instead in a later release. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 times the MCU frustratingly held back. Number 10, killing off Coulson. Kinda. Before different heroes started showing up in other franchises whenever they pleased, Coulson acted as the underlying connective tissue between those original Marvel movies, being an integral force in bringing the Avengers together. However, it was only in death that he fulfilled the role in bringing each superhero together to form a cohesive unit. After being killed by Loki, Phil's death is essentially the Uncle Ben moment for Tony Stark and company, who rally behind their fallen comrade, put their differences aside, and fully embrace being the Avengers. And at the time, Coulson's death was a shock, but because he was such a beloved character, Marvel felt the need to bring him back, to headline his own TV show, no less. This is a classic case of Marvel's desire to have their cake and eat it too. They still get the dramatic punch of his demise in the Avengers by not having the heroes know he's alive, while still using him as a draw by isolating him to the world of TV. And I guess later on, Captain Marvel. Number 9. Thor getting a new eye and hammer. Although Thor Ragnarok was essentially the first pure comedy in the MCU, it still pushed forward with some pretty substantial story moments. From Asgard being destroyed to Thor losing his trusty weapon and his eye battling Hela, stuff went down in the film's final third. And the character does sport his new wound in part of the next movie, Infinity War, but the whole thing is undone when he's given a replacement eye by Rocket Raccoon. Other than him needing both eyes to take on Thanos, there's no real reason why his injury had to be fixed. And yeah, you could argue Thor getting his eye isn't all that important in the grand scheme of things, but that's partly why it's so egregious in the first place. If Marvel can't let something as small as this stick, then how can you trust them to deliver wide-reaching consequences in solo movies? And that's all the way from how the destruction of Asgard was pretty much treated like a footnote as well, in favour of wacky hijinks. Number 8. Hydra's influence in S.H.I.E.L.D. The Winter Soldier's winding conspiracy plot ended with the entire world finding out that Hydra had infiltrated the upper echelons of S.H.I.E.L.D., slowly concocting a plan to take over Earth from the inside. It led to the complete destruction of the world's largest security organization, but it also posed many possibilities going forward. Which former allies would turn out to have been double agents the whole time? What other plans did Hydra have up their sleeve? Unfortunately, future movies weren't really all that concerned with answering any of those questions, and barely even touched upon the consequences of Hydra's takeover at all. Hell, the Avengers had pretty much fixed the problem off screen by the start of Age of Ultron. The reveal is depicted as being this huge paradigm-shifting discovery, and it is for the Winter Soldier at least. But because future movies fail to properly delve into its consequences on the world in the present and throughout history, it pretty much only works to sideline Sam Jackson for a little while after. Number 7. The new Avengers lineup in Age of Ultron. In a rather surprising turn of events, Age of Ultron ended with the bulk of the original Avengers retiring and Steve Rogers ushering in a new generation of superheroes to join the team. With Tony Stark and Hawkeye hanging up their boots and the likes of Hulk and Thor leaving Earth, the new lineup of Avengers was made up of Cap, Scarlet Witch, Black Widow, Falcon, War Machine, and Vision. While those new drafts did become key players in future movies, they were in no way the new Avengers team, as old staples like Iron Man and eventually Thor and Hulk returned to maintain the classic lineup. In part, the teasing of a new group at the end of Age of Ultron was a necessity, potentially even a failsafe, as at the time it was unclear whether Marvel were willing to shell out big paydays for the likes of Robert Downey Jr. in future movies. When they did secure the actors though, the team reverted back to its original incarnation, with the extra members returning to their supporting roles. Number 6. The appearance of Professor Hulk. Now, I genuinely do love the new version of the Hulk in Avengers Endgame in all of his dabbing glory, but even I can't deny the awesome first appearance came at the sacrifice of what could have been a great solo movie. Banner's arc stretched out from Ragnarok to Infinity War and was always said to be completed in Endgame, but nobody had any idea it would happen off-screen. After years wrestling with the two sides of his personality, the emotional toll of the snap caused them to merge into one with the help of plenty of gamma radiation. It makes sense in the context of the story, but the explanation is kinda hand-waved away, and it sacrifices the genuine drama that could have been mined here. Hulk is great as a comedy character, but his tragedy doesn't have to be thrown away entirely in order to make that happen. While yes, there was no doubt a rights issue with Universal stopping a proper solo movie here, and an extensive explanation might have bogged down Endgame, it still feels like a missed opportunity. Number 5, Nick Fury's death in Winter Soldier. Until Infinity War came around, the second Captain America film was the only MCU flick to constantly pull the rug out from under its audience. It subverts expectations from the get-go, immediately showing the always lovable Nick Fury being attacked by the Winter Soldier in a ridiculously intense shootout. Fury does escape though and makes it to Cap's apartment seemingly safe, only to be sniped and apparently killed when Bucky gets the drop on them. To hammer home the fact that Fury really is dead for realsies, they even show his lifeless corpse in the morgue, with both Black Widow and Cap mourning their former mentor. Of course, later on there's yet another twist that reveals Fury actually had one of the doctors inject him with a serum that would make him appear medically deceased so he could slip off the grid. It's kind of a cool reveal in the film itself, but bringing him back doesn't really add all that much to the story. Even worse, Marvel have barely used the character since, and it took them years to figure out how to reintroduce him to the series. Number 4, Captain America's rematch with the Red Skull. When the Red Skull showed up after years of being mysteriously absent in Infinity War, there was one question on everyone's mind. Will Captain America kick his ass in the next movie? The two only shared one film together despite being each other's nemesis, and everyone was expecting at least some kind of interaction between the two in Endgame. Of course, the way the teams were set up in that movie meant that it was impossible for the two to appear together, and there's a good chance Steve didn't even know Old Red was the guardian of the Soul Stone for the majority of the film. While the two probably wouldn't have fought anyway, as the directors and writers have constantly stressed that this version of the Red Skull isn't the same as the one in the first Avenger after being changed by his new role, there must have been something unique to show there. Instead, when Steve returns the stone off screen at the end of the film, we just have to imagine his shock when he bumps into a familiar face on Vormir. Number 3, Iron Man destroying all of his suits. Iron Man 3 is probably the most insight we get into the inner workings of Tony Stark until Endgame, showing him holding up pretty poorly after the end of the Avengers. Paranoid and suffering through a wicked case of PTSD, Tony becomes consumed by his work, constructing an army of automated Iron Man suits to protect the world. It takes Pepper Potts to snap him out of it and talk him down from his unhealthy crusade, with Tony's acceptance of something resembling a normal life brilliantly conveyed by him blowing up all of his Iron Man suits at the end of the sequel. However, that gesture is made redundant immediately in Age of Ultron, where he's shown back in the suit and helping out the Avengers without an explanation as to why. And then by the end of that film, he retires again. It's not until Civil War where Tony details why he went back on his word, and even then it's more of a throwaway thread to explain away a plot hole, rather a true dive into what it means for his character. In fact, it would take until Endgame to properly glimpse what a retired Tony would look like. Number 2, wounding War Machine. No matter how intense Civil War got, it was always made clear that no one's lives were really at stake, as there was no way that Marvel was going to have their biggest heroes killing one another. Smartly though, the filmmakers got around that inherent lack of stakes by showing that yes, while nobody is in danger of dying, people can still be harmed by the superhero squabble. The most notable casualty was War Machine, who was shot out the air by a rogue blast from Vision. Though not dead, Rhodey suffers an injury so great that he actually loses the ability to walk, ending the flick going through an advanced form of physical therapy in order to get him back on his feet. While that injury did admittedly follow through to Infinity War, the impact it has on Rhodey's character isn't really explored. There's one scene where he's talking about what the Sokovia Accords cost him, but he doesn't actually seem to be all that impacted by the events of the previous movie. Similar to Thor's eye, Rhodey's injury being brushed over isn't a huge deal in theory, but it's another example of how supposedly major moments have their impact retroactively reduced in later films. Number 1, Loki killing Odin and overthrowing Asgard. Look, it's pretty safe to assume at this point that Marvel had no idea what to do with Thor in Phase 1 and 2. From the wasted Ragnarok setup in Age of Ultron to conveniently going back and destroying the Bifrost in the first movie, there were plenty of setups that weren't followed through on. However, none were as egregious as the tease the Dark World ended on. After faking his own death, Loki is shown to have adopted the guise of Odin and taken over Asgard without anybody realizing, presumably killing his father in the process. His rise to once again becoming a major villain and a final showdown with Thor was teased here. When this cliffhanger was finally resurrected though, it wasn't really what anyone expected. Ragnarok essentially brushed the setup aside, paying it off in a comedic way and refocusing Thor and Loki's relationship to be far more brotherly and redemptive. It made for a good scene and a good dynamic between the two, but it's hard to ignore how incongruous it was when compared to the events of that second movie. Consequently, it's just yet another example of how much of a mess the Dark World is, and how Marvel completely broke away from the mythology entirely with Ragnarok and Infinity War. Admittedly, yeah, it's probably for the best, but it wasn't very neat. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you agree that Marvel held back during these moments? After all, this is just my opinion, and I'd love to hear some counter arguments about why these movies actually fulfill the potential of their plot points. But either way, while you're down there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe? Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.